Hello, in this episode I want to discuss and examine Washington DC in particular and then do a comparison to show how certain patterns continue throughout the world but also long before Washington. Washington is one of those places where even the denialists and debunkers have to admit that there is a underlying pattern just beyond the geometric plan, that there's much more to the city than meets the eye. In previous episodes, I've gone into, for one, the Capitol building, which is well known and discussed by many, but I've added and decoded many aspects of it and then compared it to other sites around the world, especially Capitol buildings, which are at the centre of the geometries of the city, such as Canberra, Brasilia, and Astana. I've also peeled back the layers on other sites. Well, for instance, Jefferson Memorial, the aspect, especially the 108 aspect, and how it applies to Doric feet, but also this number 288. Also, the Lincoln Memorial, I've shown how there is a pattern, global pattern, and the numbers 528 and 33 being one of those especially connected to occult groups, esoteric knowledge, the Hermeticism. Also pointed out Union Station and the City Beautiful movement. The architect of Union Station was Daniel Burnham. He also redesigned the Washington Mall. And the same thing happens again, where you see this the symbolic pattern within the building of the architecture and the statues and attached to it, but also especially this number 288 as well as the others, and 1080 or 108. In an earlier episode I went through a long list of the importance of 108. Also I've gone into less examined, for instance, the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, of how this building also resonates with the same hidden knowledge. The card doesn't show it, but the dome is 108 feet, 153, 2,880. Now I'd like, in this episode I want to talk about well-known structures, the Washington Monument, the famous obelisk in Washington, the Pentagon, and the White House. But rather than go again, rather than talk about what's already been discussed, I'd like to solve some of the mysteries that regard these structures and regarding their alignments and their placement. Yeah, so I'll put a link at the bottom to a Scott Onstott episode which deals with Washington, and he'll have a lot of other information for those who aren't familiar with the details, and he'll also, and through him you can also get links to other researchers and look a little bit further. But specifically now I want to talk about the Pentagon and the lack of an alignment, and explain what's happening here, and that there actually is an alignment, and there's a whole series of deeper knowledge, deeper codes that need to be peeled back, and then they can be compared to other sites around the world to dismiss any idea that this is an accident or that it's coincidence, etc. But the centre of the Washington geometry, as with all these cities, is the Capitol building or the presidential palace, but the centre of politics is at the centre of the geometry. Now, Maryland Avenue is is an avenue that leads off from the Capitol building, but it does not align to the Pentagon. However, well, it actually does, and there's quite a bit of encoded knowledge in the lack of the alignment. So all you really need to do is extend the lines out from the Pentagon and you create a pentagram. Now the tip of that pentagram meets up with the alignment going along Maryland Avenue. It's not a coincidence. There's actually much deeper stuff now, and to examine it further, weights and measures. So the geometry and there's a whole bunch of codes, but through the weights and measures you can prove this, and will basically silence any debunkers or doubters, people who might be a little bit skeptical. But it's there, it's in the pattern, it's there to be measured. But now as we go a little bit closer, we see the Pentagon, and again, this as we get closer in, and I'll extend these lines out and we'll start to see what's happening. So this line is Maryland Avenue, where the alignment should be. But as we move in a little bit, so we highlight the pentagon to form the pentagram. Many connections to phi. Phi, the golden ratio, the divine proportion, etc., is one of the fundamentals in all of these cities and all of these structures. And the pentagram is the perfect geometry to explain phi, but there's plenty of info available on that. But as we zoom in, I'd like to point out that for anyone who lives in Washington, I'm very curious. So if you do know, I'm certain that at that point, it might be a difficult place to access, but there will be a marker, there will be something there, maybe even historically a time capsule or something. But from these points, I really believe that there's something there worth looking at. And so we zoom in a little bit closer and we see the helipad, which is itself a pentagon rather than a square or a circle. But what's from that point to the face of the pentagon is 1,440 feet, 144, or 4,320 spans, 1728 inches. That's a wish list there of all the harmonic and numbers. Now, I've covered them in episodes before, so I won't repeat myself too regularly, but you can just skip back a few episodes in all the architecture across the world. These are the hidden numbers, full of hidden meaning: astronomy, music, arithmetic, and geometry. Another point worth looking at is that the face of the Pentagon building is not aligned perfectly east-west. This is sometimes some people have described this type of thing as an accident. It's not. It's a pattern. It's a global pattern. It's reflected across the world. Again, I'll start comparing that as we get towards the end of the video. But so Pentagon is aligned, but there's a hidden alignment, and in the hidden alignment, there's a hidden series of weights and measures. Always the keys is the weights and the measures within the geometry. So now we see the Washington Monument, and in the background there is a White House. You can even see the geometry leading off from it. Now we have so we have this offset here, and if we draw a line straight north-south from the White House into the Washington Monument, we see that there's an offset again, which, as where that is north-south, the Pentagon is east-west. This is part of a clever pattern. It's worth investigating more. I'm just going to go quickly through this now. The placement of the Washington Monument is one of those lingering mysteries. It's like the standard explanation is because of the swampland, and I'm not disputing that, but there is a very important reason why it is exactly on that spot, and we're going to have a look at that now. Lots of hidden knowledge, lots of hidden codes. It's a wonderful thing to examine and to measure out. It goes across the world. It's at the centers of power. So all the really important places in the world where the really important things are happening and being decided are all built around this type of hermetic or hidden knowledge. The modern rationalist debunker really, it's a religion to not choose to accept this. You can verify these facts, and it's historically you can look it up, you can measure it in using any sense you want, and then you can compare it across the world, and it is not to call it a coincidence is the cry of the fool. It's not. It's a pattern. Now, as we go a little bit closer, when we look at this north-south alignment running down from the White House, it would lead up to Meridian Hill and the Washington Monument. Why exactly on this spot? Like the Washington Mall is the monumental axis. Brasilia, Astana, Canberra all have this monumental axis. It's also in Paris and other places, but how the Washington Monument is 377 feet off axis to the east and 117 feet off axis to the south. Here I have got the link up there, and also the author. It's available online, Kurt Helfrich, but quite an interesting book he has there, and it details a lot of other points about Washington. It's also got a lot of maps for the plans that weren't adopted, and for instance, the placement of original plans for some memorials was in Meridian Hill and other places, but it's really worth a read if you're into it. But here we have a double layer of knowledge, just like with the Pentagon being off axis, off alignment, and 1,440 feet. The same happens with the Washington Memorial. So here we see the Pentagon, it's offset from true east-west, and back to the Washington Monument and from the White House. Now I want to have a look through how this is carried through many, many cities and many, many places, and just to eliminate all doubt and any cries of coincidence. The same thing is here in Winnipeg. I really respect Frank Albo, done some excellent work regarding Winnipeg, but he calls this an accident by the City Beautiful movement. It's not. City Beautiful have repeated this in many places across the world, including it's one of the things that you see very often here in my country of Australia. But going back even further, for instance, Savannah, many of other centres, you'll see how they're not aligned north-south. They're always this 6 degrees for the most part. I haven't verified the exact degree on all of them, but the pattern's fairly clear. In Raleigh, North Carolina, but in New Orleans as well, where the main road entering the city, will be off to the side. In Canada as well, as I mentioned earlier, Winnipeg, but we also see it here. And in Sydney, which I've gone through in quite a bit of detail in recent episodes, especially regarding the impact of Governor Macquarie and his wife, Lady Elizabeth Macquarie. The main axis in Sydney, Macquarie Street and Hyde Park, is that same offset. Versus Liverpool in the southwest, founded by Macquarie, has exactly the same thing. Even the layout of the park and the street is the same. Macquarie Street, Hyde Park, and the Macquarie Street Mall in Liverpool. Canberra designed the capital city of Australia, which is essentially our version of Washington, full of the geometry as well, also offset from true north. The axe historique, or the monumental axis in Paris, has the same thing, where the Louvre Pyramid and the Louvre have been, and even the July Monument are offset. Now, Karnak Temple in Egypt, Scott Onstott's Secrets in Plain Sight has got some great information, really worth watching if you're new to this. It'll give you a lot of points and where to go. Jebel Bakan in Sudan, very much similar layout to Karnak and Luxor, and it was excellent. I wish I could remember the link, but there was a Rosicrucian talk, and even in the Great Pyramid, from the King's Chamber up to the point, it's the same degree. Now, here we are back in Washington, and the offset of the angle. But again, this offset is also connected to weights and measures. Now, for instance, again, the Pentagon, we see where the east-west axis and the building is tilted to this roughly 6 degree point. Again, I haven't confirmed the exact degree of it, but it's not just the offset, it's also encoding weights and measures and special numbers. For instance, the Pentagon, as I mentioned, has all these beautiful numbers, 1440, 1728, and the Washington Monument, it's 377 feet off the alignment. Now, what's so important about that? It's not a random number, it's a very important number. It's a very special number. It's a Fibonacci number to begin with. There aren't many math properties, unlike the other numbers who have many 377. Basically, it's a Fibonacci number which connects it to 5. But it's in Washington, on the Washington Monument, and we see it on the George Washington Bridge as well, where the tower relative to the roadway and even the cabling, 377 feet. The USS Washington, 33 feet wide, but 34 feet diameter. If you look at the other submarines and even the Saturn V rockets, 33 feet. very important, but it's 377 feet long. Bronx Whitestone Bridge in New York, 377 feet high towers, 3,770 feet long. Exactly the same length as the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and I'll touch on that as well. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in there. Peking Museum Ship in Washington, the largest modern wooden boats made, not the largest, second largest, but they're all 377 feet for some reason. And staying in New York, the Statue of Liberty, a whole bunch of hidden stuff in there regarding proportions, weights and measures as well, but 377 steps to the lobby. No mistake, because the Voortrekker Monument, which was full of Egyptian, still is full of Egyptian symbolism, actually had to tone it down because of protest, but there's 377 steps. 377 feet also in Egypt, but I'll get to that later. World famous Chartres Cathedral, one of the key points of sacred geometry in this type of knowledge, 377 feet high. The great cathedrals are a mystery. The properties and the structure, the way they were built, it baffles it cannot be replicated, many aspects of it, by modern engineers. But the Galerie des Machines, 377 feet long, the longest ceiling at the time, and 148 feet high, which is the width of the Arc de Triomphe, coincidentally. Again, something I'll go into in the future. Eiffel Tower, like the Galerie des Machines, it was meant to be a temporary building for a exhibition. Luckily, this was kept. The whole building throughout resonates with this knowledge. Now, Anish Kapoor, he's quite a prolific sculptor. You see this the DNA spiral, but 377 feet high. And the Towers of Europe, or the Keough Towers as they're known, first inclined skyscrapers. They create a 30-degree incline, which creates a pendulum, which connects to the thing, but that's, again, multiple layers of knowledge underneath. But it's also to be seen in the ancient world. For instance, a temple of Artemis, or Diana, the moon goddess. Foundations 370 feet long and 180 feet wide. Again, something that goes throughout all architecture, modern and ancient. Roman Abramovich and billionaires love to have this type of knowledge. It's quite, yeah, but anyway, his yacht, 377 feet. But in the ancient world, many ships, the Memi ships as well, but 370 feet long, but 66 feet wide. So again, it's double layers, which confirm that the first is not an accident, to have multiple levels of knowledge. Just as an example, HMS Warramunga, built in Sydney, 377 feet long. Earlier I mentioned the Bronx Whitestone Bridge, 3,770 feet total length, same as Sydney Harbour, and again, multiple levels, weights and measures, just to confirm and to bring it back to the point that it's not an accident. World famous Sydney Opera House, exactly the same thing, 377 feet. Last episode I've put up was about Mrs. Elizabeth Macquarie and her impact, but the Mrs. Macquarie's Chair is a famous spot, and Mrs. Macquarie's Road, again, resonating with multiple levels. So it's not just really complex buildings, it's about building beautiful things on everything you do. And Sydney itself, the AMP building, one of the earliest skyscrapers, strong connections to Freemasonry, and so again, it's and Sydney itself resonates with this. It's undeniable. 377 feet is a Fibonacci number, which connects us to phi, the golden ratio, the divine ratio, and that's what the primary reason why it's there. There are some other points as well, but if you don't understand phi and the golden ratio, you can't really understand what's happening with this architecture, ancient and all across the world. So as you can see, this is clearly not a random set of coincidences. They're very well placed. It's part of a plan. And for instance, for the offset on the Pentagon and for 1,440 feet, 144, being the 12th Fibonacci number, it's also 12 squared, which is a nice tie into that. part of a plan, connects to fire, it also connects to sun, earth, moon and stars, to geometry, arithmetic and so much more. All of this is very well planned. It's a part of a clever design. It's part of a flexible design. It's not just a copy-paste template. The land is different, the environment is different, the buildings are different. It might be larger, they might be smaller, but they will always include these elements. And this offset from true north or from true east, as well as 377 feet or 777 steps or 377 yards, always included, it's always in there, and it connects to the Fibonacci. So in review, I believe I've explained, or at least partially answered, some of the lingering questions regarding the placement of the Washington Monument. The usual reason that it was swampy land and it had to be placed off alignment may well be true. However, that it was placed exactly there has a depth to it. There's a purpose and there's a meaning to it. So again, this type of architecture, this type of hermetic knowledge can be used and molded to the specific building, the specific location, the geography of that place. So it's, even when you have to go off template, you can still bring it back on template by using this type of pattern. It's a very clever design. Is also connected to astronomical alignments and many other things, but the golden section, the golden mean, phi, the divine proportion, these important numbers which connect to Pythagorean harmonic numbers, it's all part of, it's a lovely scheme. It's worth investigating, and perhaps if someone's in Washington, they could have a look at that area north of the Pentagon and see if there is some sort of marker there. So with that, I'll leave it, and I hope you've enjoyed. Hope you've enjoyed the series. If you haven't, please, you can just follow the links through. In the description, I'll include some links to the book referring to the architectural history of Washington's for anyone who wants to pursue it a little bit further. Some great info in there. I'll also include a link to Scott Onstott's Secret in Plain Sight, his Washington episode, so you can have a look at some of the other aspects of this. Again, thank you for watching and have a good one.
It's the stuff they don't teach you in high school or even undergrad university. Only if you're postgraduate, you'll find it.